Imagine a scenario in a small district where trust in others is shaken by a series of heinous crimes. In Ashton, a small community with only about 1,000 residents and a rich history as a winter railway terminus, a respected teacher becomes the epicenter of a tragedy that reverberates not just across the district, but across the nation. This is the account of how a mastermind became the executor of a nightmare that challenged notions of safety and justice on an unprecedented scale. In Ashton, the disappearance of Thomas Miller triggered a wave of fear and uncertainty. Thomas, known for his academic brilliance and promising future, disappeared without a trace. The only clue was a hazy security camera recording, showing him hurried and anxious, with furtive glances behind him, as if he sensed someone was following him. The community was alarmed by the discovery of this footage. Thomas's parents, consumed by anguish, struggled to understand who might want to hurt their son. Under the command of Sheriff Collins, a respected figure in the city, authorities launched an extensive search operation. Groups searched nearby woods, divers examined frozen bodies of water, and volunteers scoured every corner of the district looking for any sign of the young man. As the days dragged on, the lack of concrete answers began to wear down the city's patience. Journalists and mystery aficionados launched theories that ranged from a kidnapping by criminals to terrifying acts of local betrayal. Each new comment inflamed the collective imagination, turning everyone into amateur detectives, casting suspicion even in the shadows. A twist came when someone reported seeing an unknown vehicle roaming the city on the night of the disappearance. Briefly captured by traffic cameras, this old, worn-out car offered the first solid lead to follow. Sheriff Collins redoubled his efforts, compelled to unravel the enigma that kept Ashton in a veil of suspense. As the investigation deepened, more enigmas emerged. Each clue seemed to only complicate the case further, weaving an increasingly dense web of mystery around Thomas's fate. Promising not to give up until he found answers, Collins faced an entire city anxiously awaiting justice as he struggled to untangle the complex web of secrets surrounding the young man's disappearance. One discovery shock in Ashton Woods left everyone shaken. Parts of a human body were found buried in a horrible manner, and this news quickly spread throughout the district. Police confirmed that the remains were those of Thomas Miller, the young student who had disappeared, marking the community with deep mourning and increasing vigilance throughout the area. Sheriff Collins and his team immediately cordoned off the scene, turning the area, which was once a place of peace, into a crime scene. While investigators, dressed in special costumes, examined each part of the site, residents and journalists watched from a distance, overcome by sadness and fear. As the investigation progressed, conversations between residents increased. Everyone wanted to know if a killer was on the loose, and who it could be. The tension was palpable, and Ashton was covered in a cloud of distrust and fear. Sheriff Collins worked tirelessly, promising the public that everything was being done to find whoever was responsible. In press conferences, he asked for patience and collaboration, explaining that the case was complicated and that everyone needed to be prepared for disturbing discoveries. Collins' team faced enormous pressure, not only from residents, but also from the media that was beginning to cover the case nationally. Forensic experts analyzed each piece of evidence, looking for any clue that could lead to the criminal. Each new piece of information was meticulously examined, increasing hope of solving the mystery. As the weeks passed, new details emerged, each adding to the community's shock and anguish. It was revealed that Thomas struggled before he died, and that the criminal deliberately tried to hide the body. This information only intensified Ashton's fear and anxiety, making many question their own safety. A twist occurred when a hidden camera near the crime scene was discovered by a resident. The images showed a figure moving through the woods on the night of Thomas's disappearance. This tip rekindled hope that the case would be solved, and the sheriff made a public appeal for more information. The tragedy brought the Ashton community together like never before. Vigils were held regularly, and people supported each other in their collective grief. Despite the fear, there was a strong desire for justice and answers. This difficult period tested Ashton's strength. While Sheriff Collins and his team never stopped searching for the truth, the community waited anxiously, hoping that each new day would bring an end to the nightmare they lived through. A revelation that James Hartford, a respected Ashton professor, was the prime suspect in the Thomas Miller case shocked everyone. The community, which had always viewed James as a pillar of wisdom and ethics, now faced the harsh reality that he could be involved in something terribly sinister. The evidence pointing to his guilt included not only his presence in the vicinity of the crime scene on the night of his disappearance, but also links to past crimes that had never been fully solved. The impact of this news was devastating. Parents and students who had held him in high esteem were now questioning everything they knew about him. How could such a respected figure, who dedicatedly educated so many young people, be involved in something so horrible? Discussions intensified at community meetings, in bars and on social media, where theories and speculations multiplied every day. To further complicate matters, police disclosed that Thomas's personal items were found in James' home during a search. This included a watch that Thomas always wore and that had been given to him by his grandmother. This discovery was like throwing gasoline on the fire of the community's suspicions, and the feeling of betrayal grew even more. James, for his part, maintained his innocence, claiming it was all just a terrible misunderstanding. He stated that Thomas's items were placed in his home by someone who wanted to frame him, and that he would never harm any of his students. His lawyers argued that there was no concrete evidence directly linking him to the murder, only circumstances that placed him under suspicion. Tension in the city only increased as the trial approached. Sheriff Collins was under pressure to resolve the case quickly, but he also knew he needed to be careful not to wrongly accuse anyone. He intensified the investigation, determined to uncover the truth no matter where it led. Meanwhile, Thomas's family struggled to deal with pain and grief, desperate for justice but also fearful that the true culprit might never be found. They participated in vigils and remained active in the community, calling for justice and truth. At the school where James taught, the atmosphere was one of uncertainty and fear. Some colleagues defended him, remembering his character and the lack of concrete evidence against him, while others avoided talking about the case, fearing reprisals or further division in the community. The case became a turning point for Ashton, triggering debates about trust, justice, and the possibility of a person being so different than they appear. The community found itself in a moral and ethical dilemma, pondering to what extent they could trust the institutions and people they had always considered pillars of society. As James' trial approached, everyone in Ashton prepared to face the realities that would come to light, hoping that justice would prevail, but also fearing what more might be revealed about the person many thought they knew well. The community remained on alert, united by the tragedy, but divided by suspicion and fear, anxiously awaiting the day when the whole truth would be revealed. When the police discovered that James Hartford was an active member of an online forum focused on ancient execution methods, the Ashton community and national media were shocked. This revelation brought to light the worrying question of how violent content on the internet can influence behavior in real life. The forum, which discussed execution techniques from the gallows to the electric chair in detail, was made up of members who shared a morbid fascination with these practices. The discovery sparked a series of debates across the country. Human behavior experts, psychologists, and criminologists were frequently invited to television and radio programs to discuss the potential connections between exposure to violent content online and the increase in violence in society. Articles and blogs have proliferated, exploring how the internet can serve as both an educational tool and a trigger for deviant behavior. In the Ashton community, the news intensified fear and distrust among residents. Concerned parents began monitoring their children's internet access more closely, fearing they could be exposed to similar content. Schools in the region have started digital awareness programs, teaching students about the dangers of certain types of online content and how to surf the internet safely. The repercussion did not stop there. Local and national lawmakers have begun discussing the need for stricter laws to regulate the types of content that can be shared online. It was argued that while freedom of expression was a fundamental right, public safety also needed to be protected. Meanwhile, James' defense used this discovery to argue that although their client was a member of the forum, this did not automatically make him guilty of an actual crime. They suggested that James was merely an academic with a historical interest in execution methods, not a practitioner of them. The scientific community has also gotten involved, with studies being initiated to investigate the correlation between exposure to violent content and real-life aggression. Universities and research centers have received funding to explore this area, hoping to better understand how to prevent interest in violent content from turning into violent actions. Victims' families, however, found little comfort in these academic and legal discussions. They wanted justice and answers, not just debates about the influence of the internet. With each new revelation in court, emotions flared, and the Ashton community remained on the edge, waiting for the full truth to finally emerge. This case became a turning point for the city and, in a way, for the country, forcing a reflection on the complexity of crimes in the digital age and how society can respond to these new realities. As James' trial approached, everyone in Ashton waited anxiously, hoping the outcome would bring some degree of peace and closure. A revelation that James Hartford not only studied, but actually recreated historic crimes in Ashton, choosing his victims for their resemblance to the originals, generated a wave of horror and fascination across the country. This disturbing operational method not only brought the case to the center of national media attention, but also became an alarming symbol of the consequences of obsession and repetition of crimes. The public was shocked to discover that James meticulously followed the details of ancient crimes, from choosing victims to carrying out the acts. He seemed to be trying to correct the crimes of the past or perhaps complete a historical narrative that he himself had devised. This macabre fascination with replicating ancient crimes brought a new dimension to the case, challenging investigators and the justice system to understand and deal with a criminal who operated in such a calculated and historic manner. Discussions about the case spread across online forums, TV shows, and newspaper articles, with experts trying to decipher what could lead a person to adopt such extreme behavior. Psychologists and criminologists were consulted to analyze James' profile and his possible motivation, while historians were called in to contextualize the crimes he chose to imitate. In the Ashton community, fear was mixed with disbelief. Residents who knew James personally struggled to reconcile the image of the respected teacher with the monstrous actions of which he was accused. Security in the city has been heightened, and many residents have begun taking extra precautions, fearing that others might be inspired to follow in James' footsteps. Furthermore, the case has reignited debates about security and surveillance in small communities. Local authorities were under pressure to review how historic crimes were investigated and filed, questioning whether red flags had been ignored. Ashton schools and institutions have started programs to educate young people and adults about the importance of mental health and the impact of untreated obsessions. As James' trial approached, tension in Ashton and across the country only increased. Everyone waited anxiously for answers that could make sense of a series of such disturbing and complex acts. The now infamous case of James Hartford was not just a crime story, had become a case study in the limits of the human mind and the dangers of an uncontrolled obsession. The judgment by James Hartford has turned into a national spectacle, capturing the attention of millions of people across the country. As the details of his crimes were revealed, opinions about his sanity and the morality of the death penalty polarized. The insanity arguments presented by the defense raised questions about how society should treat mentally disturbed individuals who commit violent crimes. Live broadcasts of court sessions allowed all citizens to follow arguments and testimony up close. Mental health experts were called in to analyze James' behavior, openly discussing whether his actions were the result of an undiagnosed mental illness or simply a criminal mind. These discussions fueled national debates about the need for reforms in the mental health system and the penal system. On the other hand, prosecutors presented a meticulously constructed narrative highlighting the premeditation and brutality of James' crimes, arguing that his ability to plan and execute such acts indicated a mind aware and responsible for his actions. They sought a conviction that would bring justice to the families of the victims, many of whom testified about the devastating impact of losing their loved ones. Media coverage of the trial often leaned toward sensationalism, with news channels presenting minute-by-minute analysis and emotional reactions that sometimes exacerbated division among viewers. On social media, opinions were divided between those who saw James as a monster who deserved the maximum sentence, and those who believed he was a product of systemic failures in mental health care and deserved treatment, not execution. As the trial progressed, discussions about the ethics of the death penalty gained prominence, with human rights activists and anti-death penalty groups using the case as an example of the complexities and potential injustices of the penal system. They argued that the execution of a possibly mentally ill person would not be justice, but rather a moral failure of society. In the heart of Ashton, the community remained divided. While some residents saw the trial as a chance to close a painful chapter, others felt the wounds only deepened as the case unfolded. James's trial was not just a legal process, but a mirror of the tensions and challenges faced by society in dealing with crimes of great magnitude and the broader question of how to treat those who cross humanity's darkest boundaries. When the judge decided that James should be given a very serious punishment for his crimes, this got a lot of people talking about whether it was right or not. Some people thought it was necessary to make the families of the people James hurt feel better, thinking it would help ensure no one else got hurt. But other people thought it was too harsh a form of punishment, and that we should find kinder ways of dealing with people who do really bad things. This decision got people talking more about the rules for punishing someone and whether we should change those rules. In schools, in the newspapers, and on TV, many people discuss this, trying to understand the best way to do things when someone does something really bad. Meanwhile, in the town of Ashton, where James lived and where everything happened, people were still very sad and worried. The judge's decision did not take away the fear or sadness they felt. They knew that even after James was punished, they would still have to figure out how to live together and feel safe again. Many adults were also thinking about how we can help people before they do something bad, especially if they are going through difficult times or feeling very alone or sad. They were talking about how we can take better care of each other so that bad things like this don't happen again. After the judgment and James' punishment were completed, the town of Ashton was still feeling the effects of what had happened. People continued to think about the crimes and try to understand how something like this could have happened in their community. To help everyone learn from these sad events, some places like museums have started showing exhibits about the history of the crimes. They wanted people to remember what happened and think about how we can prevent crimes like this from happening in the future. Additionally, many documentaries have been made telling the story of what happened in Ashton. These films help people in other cities and even other countries understand the events and reflect on important issues such as justice and security. In schools and universities, teachers began to teach more about how to be safe and how to make ethical choices, that is, choices that are good and right. They wanted students to learn the importance of taking good care of each other and always doing what is right. New programs were also created to help students know what to do if they noticed something dangerous or felt something wrong could happen. The effects of James' crimes made many people in Ashton want to work together to build a safer, more united community. Residents began to get to know each other better and help each other more, as everyone wanted their city to be a place where everyone could feel safe and happy. Thus, even after a long time, the events that happened continued to influence the lives of people in Ashton. They learned very important lessons about care, safety, and justice, and these lessons helped the city become a better place for everyone. Ashton's story shows how even very sad things can teach us to create a better future if we work together and care for each other. This case impacted deeply not only Ashton, but also our ideas about security and justice. What do you think about the use of the death penalty in this case? Do you believe that justice was actually served? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to know what you think about these important issues. And check if you are already subscribed to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss upcoming stories.